In the mid-part of the 1800s, America was being ripped apart. Political, cultural, economic, moral differences were forcing apart the North and the South. Neighbor would turn on neighbor, brother on brother. In fewer places was this more apparent than in the border states. Some states choosing not to secede, but also not joining the Confederacy. Kentucky never seceded, even though there were many within its borders who felt Southern sympathies. Even within Nelson County, we had sons fighting fathers, brothers fighting brothers, neighbor against neighbor. We were a nation, a state, a county divided.
In the fall of 1861, Bardstown didn't have a hospital. By the spring of 1862, we had 3. Now those 3 hospitals, of course, were for the military soldiers. We ended up with Spalding Hall that would hold over 300 soldiers there. In fact, in January of 1862, Sister at Nazareth wrote that there were over 300 soldiers at the hospital and the college, 100 at the spinning factory on South 4th Street, and these all had smallpox. Of course, germs were the greatest soldiers in the Civil War. They would actually be the ones who took out more soldiers than bullets. And in our case here in Bardstown, these training camps with all of the close living conditions and unsanitary conditions demanded that there be medical care and medical facilities for the Union soldiers coming south. The building on North 3rd Street, now known as the Booker Noe House, but in this period, in the 1860s, known as Roseland Academy, was also used as a hospital. When we talk about schools, like the college and academy, and the factory being available for hospital space, you have to realize that these were boarding schools. They had beds and bedding and all the facilities you needed to take care of numerous people. The factory had a wide open space, and when they ran out of the school space, then they went to the factory, opened it up, and put pallets on the floor. Now this wasn't a 1-month use. This use of these hospitals went on for several months. In fact, it would be the summer of 1863, a year and a half later, before all the hospitals were empty here in Bardstown. When you've set up your hospitals, you're using your military surgeons and military nurses to staff them, but the reality was there were more patients than there were staff members. So they turned to the ladies of the community. Many of the ladies in the community, out of the goodness of their hearts, and I don't think it really mattered whether they were Confederate sympathizers or Union supporters, they came and they helped nurse these sick soldiers. In fact, they are given credit by several of the letters from the former patients there for their kind attention and their care, for having made their stay in the hospital better and probably saving their lives. Other nurses that were turned to were the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth. The nearby order heard very quickly about the need for nursing to care for these soldiers, and they would send several of their sisters to come and live at St. Joseph College and supply the nursing care that was needed. So the sympathies, again, whether they lay with the North or South, they were set aside when it came to taking care of human beings in need. In late August of 1862, the rumor came down the trail that Braxton Bragg and his 26,000 Confederates were on the way to Bardstown. The Union soldiers evacuated the hospital, sent them by train to Louisville, all except the very serious illnesses that were there. And they had about 20 of the patients that had to be left here. Well, September 22nd, when Braxton Bragg's army arrived, he had sick and injured soldiers that went immediately into the same hospital that had just been evacuated by the Union. But the 20 Union soldiers that were there were joined by 200 Confederate soldiers. So you had a situation where both sides were represented in the same hospital. This would continue for several months. And they always gave credit to the ladies of the community for keeping the peace in St. Joseph College Hospital. Because as long as the ladies were there taking care of the patients and giving them water and treating them, changing their bandages and all, everyone was very polite and peaceful. But the soldiers said as soon as the women went home at night, to take care of their families while war broke out in the dormitories. And they would throw things across the aisle to the Reb across the way or the Yankee over in the corner. And so I guess that peace only lasted as long as the ladies were there to hold it. Many of the soldiers actually died from illnesses that today we have vaccines and we treat as childhood illnesses. Measles, meningitis, pneumonia. There is even an account of a soldier dying of nostalgia. Now, nostalgia to me is homesickness. So I guess you can have a terminal case of homesickness. I imagine he was very depressed and just gave in to his depression. But 125 young men would die at Hospital No. 2 in Bardstown between January and May of 1862. And a list of their names was found in the court records when doing research about the Civil War. The list of their different units also helped supply the names of all the different states that were represented in these training camps around Bardstown. From a letter of a Civil War soldier writing home about what his life was like in the Army, we know that every day one of his jobs was to go check the 3 hospitals, and anyone who had died since the day before, he and his group would take the bodies and bury them. He noted that they buried 3 to 4 soldiers every day that had succumbed to their illnesses. Well, this went on for over 6 weeks, and at the time he was here in Bardstown. So well over 300 soldiers would be buried here during the time the hospitals were in operation. These were federal soldiers. These Union soldiers were dug up in 1867 and moved to the National Cemetery in Marion County at Lebanon, Kentucky. This was the movement of the government to consolidate all of the soldiers who had died in one place. The Confederate soldiers who would die here were buried in our public cemetery. The Bardstown Cemetery had just been opened in 1856, and today we can still go up and see the site where these valiant Confederate soldiers died away from home, buried away from home and their families. About 10 years ago, the Sons of the Confederacy made it their project to put markers up for all the young men that they could find their names and units and all there at the cemetery. In 1904, the Daughters of the Confederacy, the John Crepes Wycliffe unit, would raise money, or had raised money for over 20 years, to buy a statue. It was the movement at the time to put up statues in the cemeteries and on the squares and all of Northern and Southern soldiers. So we have a Confederate soldier looking south, watching over his Confederate dead there right at his feet. And so today when we go up there, that just reminds us not only of the soldiers who died, but also of the families of Confederate soldiers who continued to honor them 40 and 50 years after their death.